On this computer. Okay. Excellent. I'm always so excited when I remember to do that at the beginning of the call and not like 10 minutes in. Well, hi everyone. How great to see you all at this crazy time of year. I hope that at the very least you're having some good sunny weather and looking forward to a little time off, maybe. I don't know. Let me just, there's our chat. Okay. So what I'd like to do is do some quick introductions. If you can just say your name and your program and or institution. And then after you do that, if you can drop it in the chat as well for people who like that visual. And I'll just call you out depending on where you are on my screen. So Michaela, you are upper left-hand corner.
Hi everyone, I'm Michaela. I'm an undergraduate researcher at the University of Delaware looking at disclosure.
And we will come back to you in a moment. Sharon?
Hi, I'm Sharon Thompson. I am a program coordinator at Eastern University outside of Philadelphia.
Good to see you. Eliza?
Unmute. Hi, I'm Eliza Green. I'm the director of the Autism Support Program at the University of Arkansas.
Great. Kim?
Unmute. Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Kim Jamison. I'm the director of the STARS program at Christian Brothers University in Memphis, Tennessee.
Great. Always good to see you.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, I just clicked the wrong button there. Melanie?
Hello, Melanie Lee at the University of Utah with the UReach program.
Right. Kathy?
Hi, I'm Kathy Dalberger calling on this call from the University of Maryland at College Park. And we just got news that we got over $1 million donation from an alum. So we'll be funded. So now we're 1.25 million from the same alum. So good news for us there.
That is excellent news. Congratulations. Wow. I bet you have a nice shopping list at the ready. Emmanuel?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm Emmanuel Major. I'm the director of the Full Spectrum Learning Program at Austin Peay State University in Clarksville, Tennessee. And if you're giving any money away, we'll gladly accept it.
Suddenly, everybody wants to partner with the University of Maryland.
Right.
Beth?
Hi everyone, Beth Rowland. I'm from Santa Fe College in Gainesville, Florida, and I oversee the Spectrum of Success program here.
Great. Emily?
Hi everyone, Emily Heyer from St. Mary's College of California, and I'm assistant director there and oversee our Connect program.
Megan?
Hi, I'm Megan Davis. I'm the director of the UA ACTS program at the University of Alabama.
Ashley?
Hello, Ashley Richardson Minute. I am the director of Longhorn Ties Neurodiversity Support here at UT Austin.
Great, good to see you. Annie?
Hi, I'm Andy Lecture. I am the accessibility specialist at Furman University, and I head our program, Find Furman.
Great, okay. Annie Bruno?
Hi, I'm Annie Bruno. I'm at the Autism program at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign.
Great. Jeannie?
Hi there, I'm Jeannie Kramer. I'm from University of Illinois as well, and I'm leading the Illinois Neurodiversity Initiative.
Excellent. Karen?
Hi, y'all. I'm Karen Cranes Edison from The Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio, and I am the program manager of ACE.
Great.
Tom Beeson. I coordinate the Spectrum program at Clemson University, and sorry that I'm driving right now. So hopefully that was clear enough.
That was perfect, Tom. Thanks. And Michael?
Hello, my name is Michael Davies. I am a program director at Utah Valley University over the Passages Transition Services.
Great, great to have you here. Well, it's good to have you all, and I'm really so pleased that so many of you were able to join us today for what I think is just a really interesting conversation. I hope you've been maybe thinking about it in between other things since our last call. And before we get into that, I just want to mention a couple things. So the College Autism Summit, the program proposal deadline is in just a couple of weeks, June 5th. So if you are considering submitting a program proposal, you've got a little time left. And I also wanted to mention, and you'll be hearing about this, you'll see it mentioned in our newsletter, and I'll send something out on the listserv as well, but we really want to promote this. So we have a $5,000 sponsorship from our friends at Mansfield Hall to cover the cost of up to 10 students to get travel subsidies to come to the summit. And so our planning team has put together what they're calling the Summit Student Experience, and are looking for maybe between 10 and 15 undergraduate students who are neurodivergent, who are interested in advocacy issues, interested in networking, really interested in the conversations that happen at the summit. And so we will waive their registration fee and then help support their travel, hoping, of course, that their institutions will also help support them. So the deadline for that is going to be sometime this summer. And again, I'll send this out more formally, but I hope that you will give some thought to any undergraduate on your campus that is potentially really interested in kind of being part of these conversations. And they'll have a pre-conference workshop led by Helen Rodier and John Caldora. So on Wednesday morning, they'll gather as a group and do some kind of advocacy training, learning, leadership. They'll have an opportunity to do a students only roundtable with our keynote speaker, Russell Lehman. And then we will ask them if they are interested in participating in the student panel that will take place on Thursday morning. So it's a great opportunity. If students say, I like some of that, don't really want to do a panel, or, you know, that's fine too. But we really think this helps us to really shape the conversations, I think, at the summit. I know a number of you who are thinking about summit proposals include students as presenters. And so those students would certainly be top of the list for getting to tap into this support. Any questions about that before we shift? We're wicked excited about it. Aren't we, Megan? Yeah. She's on our planning committee. All right, so great to see folks here. And I want to just give a shout out to Michaela. Michaela, for those who weren't here the last time we gathered, could you explain how it is you have ended up sitting in on this call and your interest in it?
Yeah, so if we didn't get to meet last month, my name is Michaela. I'm an undergraduate researcher here at the University of Delaware. I work under Jess Monahan in the Spectrum Scholars Office. And right now we are hopefully going to submit to IRB next week a study looking at autism disclosure in higher ed. In what situations do students choose to disclose, but more importantly, why? What thoughts and feelings and opinions and prior experiences going into the decision surrounding disclosure of autistic identity?
And can you share with the group what led you to your curiosity on this topic?
Yeah, so we were originally working on a slightly different project called the Student Voice Project, where we were hoping to get autistic students on our campus to come in for on-camera interviews about their experiences being autistic on campus, most specifically with professors, what accommodations work well in the classroom, what doesn't, what do professors do well, where can we improve as a campus, But we found is that we couldn't find anybody who was willing to talk to us on camera. So from that, we really realized that there's a real need to talk about disclosure in higher ed and why aren't students comfortable publicly disclosing their autistic identity on campus.
So we are eager to hear from Michaela and Jess and their team, what they figure out in this research project. But I wonder if any of you who have maybe been given some thought to this or read my email and said, oh, right, I kind of vaguely remember that conversation about 4 weeks ago. If anyone would like to kind of kick us off with some thoughts or questions that have been on your mind when it comes to this question of disclosure, confidentiality, communication.
One thing that I've experienced is there's still very much a stigma, especially in like secondary education, tied to autism, to the point that I've actually had a few students who their parents will meet with us and tell us, my student has autism, but we don't want you to tell them that. They don't even know. And it's this thing, like, even if that's not specifically what's happening, even if they do know they have autism, I know that there's still the stigma at the secondary level that might make them very much uncomfortable with speaking about it and advocating for themselves at the higher ed level. So I know that that's definitely going to be a factor.
Mm-hmm. Right. Kim?
I have had the same experience as Andy. I've had parents tell me that they don't, their child does not know they have autism, but they do. Or they think they might have it, but they're not diagnosed and they don't know how to get a diagnosis. And it's hard to even find somebody to do the adults with autism. But the one that for sure is the stigma, because, and that's, I mean, it's a lot of reasons, but the stigma is such a big part of it. I had one parent who her daughter was involved with our social program from the moment she was a freshman to the time she graduated, but she never disclosed to the school she had autism. So she didn't receive extra time or anything, any accommodations. And finally her senior year, like I didn't help her like in the coaching part, because you have to actually have a diagnosis of autism to have that. But when she was about to graduate, she failed one of her engineering classes because she needed extra time on her exams and she didn't get it. So when that finally happened, I asked her mom why she never got accommodations for her. And her mom said, well, I didn't want to have a red mark on her record. And I thought, well, there won't be a red mark on her record. That's all HIPAA, it's all protected. But she just, I think that's a lot of them feel that way. They're concerned about having their record tarnished. And it's so sad, because I know in order to have our students in the team program where we provide the one-on-one mentoring and coaching, they have to have an autism diagnosis. And so many of them need the help. And I see them now, they're graduating and they're not able to get jobs. And it's very sad.
Thanks, Kim. So stigma is an inherited condition. Karen, see your hand up.
I think one of the things that helped our campus a lot and helped our students a lot, other than the fact that we were able to send one student last year to the College Autism Summit, and this year we have a lot that want to come. So wait, you'll see a lot of scholarship applications coming through, but don't worry, we're trying to fund them also. But until they had numbers to where they could feel like they weren't the only one speaking out, it was really difficult for our students. Right now, we've got a cohort of about 10 people who don't have a problem standing in front of an audience, whether it's faculty or staff, and being able to share what their autism journey on campus has been. They're being very frank and very open about what some of the challenges that they faced are. What the barriers, not challenges, barriers. I mean, just, and I have another student right now who is stepping up to address microaggressions in the classroom. And a year ago, he wouldn't have done it because he felt alone. So now that he has at least a small cohort around him, a small community, he feels much more comfortable. Yeah. He was told to take his earplugs out and then he said, well, I'm autistic. And then the instructor didn't know what to say. And then the next time the instructor said something about, now there's going to be a really big noise, so watch out. Like,
Any
Yeah.
small steps.
yeah, small.
But yeah, fascinating. So numbers and cohort size is really one of the variables that we're kind of looking at. And I think Michaela, for the research end of things, kind of thinking about how numbers in a cohort or peer group affect somebody's willingness to disclose. Laura, I see your hand up.
Just kidding. I I lowered my hand and didn't unmute my mic. I'll get it one of these days. So I think I agree with everything that has been said. I do a lot of workshops on campus just with talking about neurodiversity, and what that's led to is a lot of people, not just students, coming to talk about their own thoughts on, my son was just diagnosed, someone in our, facilities department was talking about that. Faculty member said, hey, I actually just got diagnosed at age 60 now as autistic. And a lot of those stories coming together with students now starting to kind of moving out of K-12 into college and trying to empower them to understand their own identities are resonating with some of these different experiences of adults on campus who are also now sharing that, oh, I'm neurodivergent, or my child is neurodivergent, and creating this collective of not just, the students having a cohort, but really as a campus, trying to connect that energy into activities and events on campus so people can learn more. So we did a panel this spring, and I had members from student members as well as professors as well as staff at graduate and undergraduate levels. So it was, it was trying to be diverse across the entire campus of experience, talking about their lived experiences. And people said that was so powerful for them. And that was neurotypical and neurodivergent students were attending. And now they're taking ownership to want to do more to raise that awareness of what it means on campus. And so I think it's not just about, students recognizing in other students, but also seeing that the community as a whole is representative of a community outside of a campus where they can connect with people. We've also seen more students coming to talk about I self-identify this way, and I'm curious about going for a diagnosis, but I'm afraid that my identity won't be validated if I do, and then what? What happens if I try, I put the effort in, and then they tell me I'm not when I feel like I am. That's come up a few times this year as part of these discussions.
Well, so a student who's self-identified and then does what they're supposed to do according to the process to get the neuropsych eval and walks away from that without a diagnosis.
Well, even before that happens, they're thinking about the fact that they could go this diagnostic route and then not get a diagnosis. So the question is it worth it? Do I want to do this? Is it valuable to me to go this route, or is it enough for me that I self-identify? And trying to help them understand what the differences are, but also validating that there are concerns that if you're not diagnosed, then how does that impact you? And what does that, emotionally, how does that impact you? Not just how does it impact, the paperwork in the disability office and accessibility and all those other things. Yeah.
Fascinating. Interesting analogies there when you think about people who do an ancestry or a DNA test, right? And then discover that they're adopted. Or they don't have the particular background that they've grown up believing. And how does that identity shift even happen in one's own mind? Tom?
Oh, thanks, Lee. So I kind of maybe will echo some things that already been said, but the spring class for my sophomore students is a class on neurodivergence. And in reading student essays from that class, what's really interesting to me is it doesn't even have to be people on campus. Exposing them, requiring them to kind of educate themselves on neurodivergence if they haven't already done that, exposing them or asking them to look into influencers and other people who are autistic or ADHD or Tourette's or whatever it is, really seems to have a huge impact on students feeling much more comfortable with their own neurodivergences, even if it's someone they're never going to meet. So that's been impactful for me. And we've likewise done training on campus. We had a faculty training. My wife and I did a faculty training at the end of April, actually, which had me talking for way too long and then a student panel for about 30 minutes. And we got pretty good feedback on that too, and reasonable attendance for the very last day of the semester. So, but I had an interesting experience in interviewing incoming student and his parents, and it got me thinking actually about disclosure in a way that I probably have thought before, but hadn't thought recently. The dad had asked me, not in front of his son, when his son was meeting with a graduate student, the dad asked me if I could work with his son on reducing his stimming. And of course, one answer I have to that is, oh yeah, I've been trained to do that, right? Of course, I don't do that. That's not okay anymore. But I know how to do that. It also is harmful, potentially. But it did cause me, but I did say to him, I said, if your son was interested in that, I would talk to him. And it did occur to me that if his son did have more control over his stimming, it would change disclosure for him. Right now, he's kind of broadcasting to a lot of people his autism, right? And if he had more control over those, motor behaviors, he might not. And so it's a complicated thing. I don't have a lot of insight into that. It's just kind of interesting to think about how, when I look at students or talk to students who don't have a lot of overt autistic traits, there's a big incentive to mask, right? There's a big incentive to mask. And then and then there are the students who can't mask, and then also, I think, increase the likelihood that students who don't have a lot of overt autistic traits are likely to mask because they don't want to be associated with those people who can't control, their stimming, or can't control their vocal tics, or can't manage this. I don't know, just my 2 cents.
Yeah, interesting. So yeah, the idea of being able to choose when you mask and when you don't. And I'm reminded of what Matt Siegel said last month when we talked about this, talking with students about framing disclosure as a tool or a strategy that they have some control over, but not everybody's going to have that same level of control. Jean, your hand was up.
I'll try to be concise. It's not one of my gifts. But I've just been listening to what everyone's been saying, and our students begin with a semester of a course on executive functioning. And one thing we really work on during that course is self-evaluation, self-awareness, and then self-advocacy. And I've taught 2 semesters now, and we welcome all forms of neurodiversity. we have a lot of group discussions on identity and shame, how shaming it is, how all the ways they've been shamed in their lives, talking about that fear of identifying as being autistic but not being validated when you go to get that that diagnosis. There's fear behind that, and the different trauma responses that people have to the shame that they incurred. And all of this being part of an investigation into how their brain works. We do, executive function testing at the beginning, and they get to see the profile of their strengths and weaknesses. We start talking about strengths and weaknesses. And then we start talking about the idea of full disclosure and partial disclosure. The fact that you can go into an environment and you can talk about, hey, I'm autistic and these are my needs, or you can say, I do best in a low stimulation environment. I do best when people give me very clear instructions. And I feel like that's a really valuable tool to have. And going kind of back to what Tom is saying in an abstract way, having the choice and the skill set to be able to choose, am I going to fully disclose? Am I going to partially disclose? But just that self-advocacy piece of, I need to tell people what environment I do best in. And if you choose not to fully disclose, that's fine. Just be able to advocate for yourself so that you are as successful as possible in every environment.
Jean, I have one question. When you are teaching this class and engaging with the students, is there anything in particular, is there a topic or a strategy that you see them really resonate powerfully with? Like what catches their attention more than anything else in your content?
Anything that they relate to. So they all have different profiles of strengths and weaknesses, and they're very attracted to that. But as far as feedback goes, the feedback I've been getting is that the group discussions have been the most beneficial. They're very pointed group discussions and very guided group discussions so that there's equal sharing among the group discussions, but talking about their lived experience being neurodivergent and the ways that people have assisted them and shamed them, and the barriers that they've come up against.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Tom, is your hand up? Where's that?
Sorry.
That's okay. So now your hand is down. I'm watching the chat here, and I'd love to go back to Melanie, your comment a few moments ago about sharing utilization data and your strategy, your rationale for doing that, and the response that you're getting. Can you talk a little bit more about that, if you can unmute? And don't mean to put you on the spot, but I just put it in the chat, Lee. It's the whole point. Okay. Oh, okay. All right. We'll come back to you. Yeah, I get that. Many of us do. Andy, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I just had a different possibility as another factor as like why we're not getting the participation in this research. And it's slightly different, but I'm disabled. I have hearing loss and I've worn hearing aids my whole life. So it's not the same, but growing up, my parents got me hearing aids and sort of taught me to view myself not as disabled. And, you know, since then I've done a lot of like learning about myself and realized obviously I identify as disabled and I seek out the supports when I need them and I advocate for them. But because of that, when I got to college myself, I hadn't gained those tools. and I didn't view myself in that way. And so I know that this is heavily related to masking, because people who are masking and find that they're, you know, getting good at masking or comfortable masking, and sort of blending in, for lack of a better word, I have to wonder if that could also be a factor. If these are, you know, students coming in and, you know, working actively against that disability identity, not because it's a bad thing, but just because they see themselves as like fitting the mold, so to speak, and they don't need supports and they don't need these other things that we're offering. And so that could also be coming into play as to whether or not they're going to identify as autistic or neurodivergent, and whether they're going to participate in these things or seek out services.
Wow, that's really interesting. Yeah, it reminds me of something, Tom, you said last time we were together, that you had been noticing that students who had an early in life diagnosis seem to be less inclined to disclose or responded more on the stigma end of things than later diagnoses. And can you like talk a little bit more about that? Because I just think that's such a critical point, and I think it relates to what Andy was saying.
I mean, it's not a scientific finding, obviously, but I think they just have so much more accumulated trauma and bad experiences related to the diagnosis. And, you know, that probably comes from a variety of sources, right? But they do not see neurodivergence as a positive thing at all. Or if they do, they have so much experience with it being treated as something that's not positive that it's really hard to kind of unlearn a lot of that kind of associations. Or that's my take on it.
Well, it could turn into a scientific finding as Michaela and her team start to do a multiple regression analysis of factors that lead to disclosure. But, you know, I think the idea of growing up in an environment where you've internalized a stigma response from family is going to be profoundly important, right? So
I also think there might be something to the fact that it's very different to be told something as opposed to figure out something. So, you know, if you're diagnosed at 3, you know, you're told, right? Or maybe you're not told, as we found out. He doesn't know yet, right? But if you know, I have a student who doesn't have an autism diagnosis. They have an ADHD diagnosis. They're wanting an autism diagnosis. They should have an autism diagnosis. It's expensive to get an autism diagnosis. But you know, she's very much more in tune with her differences, even though, you know, she's also had some bad experiences in her life regarding to her neurodivergences. She's figured out what it is now. And so there's a lot more positive identity, I think, with the label, perhaps.
Yeah. Sharon?
Yeah, I think that it has more to do with their experiences in response to the label than when it was given, because I've had students diagnosed late who really struggle with not wanting that diagnosis or whatever. I don't remember now what Andy said that made me think of that. I was just interviewed a prospective student last week, and he came in very, very rigid posture and wasn't moving at all while we were talking. And he told me at one point in the lecture that he wanted to learn to be better at masking. And I just matter-of-factly said, oh, there's lots of research that masking can be bad for your mental health. So I'd be more interested in talking with you about when it would be useful for you to mask and when you might not need to. And he asked me more about that. So we talked about it a little bit. Like I gave the example, like you might want to kind of make yourself smile at a party because it's easier to meet people if you're smiling. But if you're focusing on smiling when you're in class, you're going to miss a lot of, you know, the important lecture material. So you don't really need to be arranging your face in that particular setting. And then I noticed as we continued to talk, his posture relaxed, and I have a lot of toys in my office, and he started playing with the toys. And he asked me for feedback at the end about how he presented. And I said, well, at the beginning, you were very rigid with yourself and you weren't allowing yourself to move. And then you relaxed. And I said, that was pretty comfortable for when you were playing with the toys and you were more relaxed. So it was interesting to see his assumptions about masking kind of shift just in the course of a 1-hour interview.
Mhm. Well, that feels like a very important conversation for him to have had with you. Eliza?
Yeah, and I feel maybe that what I was gonna say is not, I don't know if it'll follow a linear thing here, but I think that a lot of my students, I would say, are not terrific at masking. And so we talk a lot about just sort of self-acceptance, and that I don't like to talk about autism as a superpower or anything like that. I really get quite offended by some of those presentations, but you know, you got blue eyes, you're right-handed, you have autism, you know, and it just is, you know, and anybody, I would say any of you, if you met any of my students, any of the 100 or so students I've worked with in my, you know, since I've been running this program, in 90 seconds, you would know they were on the spectrum. And that's okay, you know, that it's okay. And we talk a lot about kind of self-acceptance and that disclosure, you can tell or not, but folks who are sort of in tune, people will pick up on your idiosyncratic behavior. And so you know, you can discuss it or not, that's up to you. But I don't want my students to think that that they're successfully hiding something from the world. And I certainly don't want them to think they have to. Yeah, so the disclosure is, you know, I feel like, you know, say it loud and say it proud, because, you know, people are going to see that I have curly hair and that, you know, like I'm not hiding it. So, yeah, I think that the real difficulty is coming now for my students as they get older, about whether or not or when to disclose to prospective employers, and the fear of not being able to prove that they didn't get the job because they disclosed, but not interviewing well, and then having not disclosed, and so their odd interview, different interview from their colleagues, is not explained in some way.
All right,
That's
so
our big challenge now.
yeah, so really a fascinating choice for students to make as they enter the job market. They can disclose and hope that they're disclosing to someone who is going to understand and appreciate what they've just said, and hope that the job it works out, or not disclose, but wonder how they appeared and what their interviewer made sense of, or how they made sense of what they saw. Yeah. Michaela?
Yeah, circling back to what Tom said a little while ago about how early diagnosis leads to like more trauma around autistic identity, and that's why students who are diagnosed earlier may be more hesitant to disclose. I was actually sort of thinking about the reverse of that as he was saying that, of like those with late diagnosis growing up undiagnosed, like not knowing, is a different kind of trauma. So that also might make people who are later diagnosed more likely to disclose, because they're trying to avoid the kind of trauma that happened growing up undiagnosed.
So whether they had a diagnosis or not, they likely were victimized or bullied by peers.
Yeah, I think both situations can be traumatic, but they're traumatic in different ways.
How so?
Well, I think something that you guys have mentioned a lot is like people are like experience like hand holding in K through 12, where they feel like they've been labeled and they don't want to take that to college, and they may sort of push away from autistic identity because they don't want to disclose, they don't want to repeat that experience. But I think a lot of us who are late diagnosed experienced a lot of mental health challenges as a result of like not understanding our struggles, not understanding our sensory needs. so disclosure can be a way for us to be supported in the future.
Yeah, that's great. That's really interesting. Andy?
I just heard a couple of things that were being said that just got me thinking about this. But someone mentioned the disclosing during job interviews, and I think it's important when considering disclosure, like where this information is going and how it might be used, because we know that there's a stigma around it, and as wrong as we feel that stigma is, it's still there. And I was sort of just comparing this to my own experience as a gay man. Like, I live in the South, and I have to be very careful with who I tell about that, because that has certainly hurt me in the past, especially with employment. And so, you know, I think it's something we should consider when we're talking about disclosure is, where is it going? Is this a public forum where anyone can access this information? And, you know, again, I'm looking at that through the LGBT lens, so that might not necessarily apply in the same way here, but just like when you're choosing whether or not to disclose, I think it's important for them to consider like how this person might perceive it and how that information might be used for or against them. And that I can see that being absolutely a factor, because, you know, I think it's just so similar to the LGBT aspect. It's that information has been and will be continued to be used against me. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Emmanuel.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to chime in and say something similar. I think when it comes to disclosure, if it's obvious, I typically tell our students to use it in a way to show their strength. For instance, for me, as soon as I start talking, everybody knows that I'm not from the United States. I have an accent, so I cannot really hide that. So if it's an interview process, so I automatically use that as a strength, like, hey, I speak multiple languages, you know. So it's the same way we teach our students. If it's something that's going to be beneficial to you to disclose that you have autism, don't just stop there. Just say, okay, I have autism. You can choose to say those are the things that I need, but also at the same time, you can say those are the things that I'm really good at. You know, that way you sell yourself on that positive angle as well. So especially in an interview type of setting, it's important to also always get that positive angle to your disclosure as well.
What a great strategy. Thinking again back to what Matt said about disclosure as a tool or a strategy that's intentionally chosen, and then to go that extra step and say, so not just I'm autistic or I'm neurodivergent, and here are all the ways that I can benefit your company, you know, benefit your this relationship, but to be really upfront, which, you know, I think for any of us would be really challenging. You don't want to brag about who you are, but repositioning or reframing what you're bringing into a relationship or an organization seems useful. I'm reading this comment from Beth. You had a student who sought out an evaluation. Beth, can you talk a little bit more about this student and their experience?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So the student had actually attended a private religious school growing up. So I think that was another layer where there might not have been like a child find kind of legislation looking to do evaluations for students as much. So that was a factor where they may have, if they had been in a public school, maybe they would have, they feel, so this is a part of, they feel like they might have been identified earlier, but they described feeling, they described that they had, you know, they had a lot of sensory seeking things that they would get in trouble all the time for not sitting still, not staying in their seat, not all these things. And then to have this, this revelation around 20 years old that by talking with other neurodivergent people who suggested that they might be neurodivergent, and then they went down this rabbit hole of learning about autism and autistic identity, and then realizing that they have it, but then they didn't have a diagnosis, kind of getting back to what several of you have shared. And then also that recognizing of ableism and this lens of medical model autism and not wanting to be harmed in the process of actually seeking the evaluation and worrying that things like ABA were going to be promoted. These are her words, right? So then what the feeling like I need to find an evaluator that I can afford, number one, and that will be neurodiversity affirming and talk to people. I mean, I was so impressed by how she finessed this to find somebody in the community that was a neurodiversity affirming evaluator and then did receive the diagnosis. And to read the differences of the evaluations was so interesting too, that this evaluator took her history, of course, did some of the tools that are kind of required, but it was a cool evaluation to read, and ended up that the student received the diagnosis, but had already known that they had it. Just very interesting kind of paths. And really to kind of agree with Michaela's point that looking back, experienced a lot of trauma, not knowing that they were autistic, and experiencing this feeling that I'm a bad kid, like I'm not able to be good enough for my teachers. So does that give some context?
Yeah. Yeah, really, really interesting. Megan, I'm struck by your comment about the idea of partial disclosure. Can you talk a little bit more about what that looks like and how you decide what part?
Yeah, it's just something that, you know, when we have students who are starting job interviews or internship interviews, especially for some of our students who are a little more hesitant to disclose or have concerns about disclosing, we make sure they understand kind of the concept of partial disclosure, where they go in and, you know, can say stuff like, I may sometimes misread social cues, or I may have some, you know, sensory sensitivities, and to outline some of the autism specific experiences that they might have, but without ever actually saying the word autism. So it's a way to kind of, you know, put some of those things on the radar, but not putting the label on it necessarily.
Interesting. And and that's where maybe the analogy, the comparison with an LGBT identity disclosure kind of breaks down, right? Because you can't really get away with saying, I'm a little gay, right? You know, like, or I have these certain traits, like it's more of a kind of a binary there. Maybe not, but yeah, this idea of, you know, here are the things that I bring to this job or this group or this relationship, and leave it up to the receiver of that information to go, oh, you're autistic, right? Like, you know, you said these 4 things and, oh, you're autistic. And then hopefully say that in a very affirming way of like, oh, sounds like you're autistic. Cool. Well, let's move on to my next question in this interview. Emmanuel?
Yes, I was just going to say something similar to what Megan said. We focus a lot on the need. We help them phrase sentences like, I need this X, Y, and Z, as opposed to actually saying that they have autism, or you know, to avoid some of the full disclosure. That's one of the ways we do partial disclosure as well, is focusing on, I need this from you. Especially, it could be from when they talk to their professors at the beginning of the semester, or when they talk to an employer doing an interview. It's just, I need X, Y, and Z. And then, as like you were saying, Lee, then if the employer or professor infer what the diagnosis is, that's not because the person itself, himself or herself or themselves, disclose that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I think the question for an employer or a professor is, what are the tells in the way that you lead your classroom or you lead your organization or the kind of employment environment? What are the clues that would lead someone to say this is a safe place to disclose this information, and this is not a safe place? You know, and I think, as Andy was saying, like in the South, there are some things that you can't say that up here in Connecticut are not a big deal. So it's really helping our students understand kind of contextual cues and clues that might lead them to do a kind of full-on disclosure or a partial disclosure, or using Matt's language to kind of see it as a tool or a strategy. Andy?
Yeah, and going off of that, I think, you can also look at the strategy of this partial disclosure during the interview and during the job, like getting the job process. But then once you have it and maybe you've been working there and you've proven that, you can do the job, then you can do the full disclosure. And I think that could be something that helps removing the stigma for those who are around you, because they see, a capable employee first, and then they see autism second or third or fourth or fifth. And instead of making the autism the piece that they focus on, they just realize, oh, autism is just a part of who you are, just like, things that are what make me. And that can sort of empower the label to not be stigmatized as strongly. It gives us that perspective of our capabilities as opposed to our weaknesses or our, the things we might need support with.
Right. And a savvy employer who recognizes the talent that a neurodivergent employee brings to the workforce is going to look for more. And then you end up with that safety in number, or that comfort in number that increases disclosure. Melanie, how's your dog? Quiet?
Okay, so it was a false alarm. It was not a food delivery, unfortunately, but my neighbors were getting a delivery. So Lee, I think your original question was why even include the statistic? Yes?
Yeah. Well, tell us about your decision to do that and how people respond to it.
Yeah, so I think for many reasons, Michaela, to these themes that are bubbling up, right? Like the stigma, education around autism and neurodiversity. When I was hired, part of my charge was to be an educator on campus and to help our campus community sort of land on not a universal definition of neurodiversity, but for us to have some sort of shared understanding of what neurodiversity is. And on our campus, the hope is that it will not equate to autism solely. And so for me, that is part of why we were digging into the numbers to begin with, was how are we sort of operationalizing neurodiversity and thinking about who or how or what are these diagnoses? And I can't remember who exactly it was on this tiny screen, was talking about identity versus diagnoses, right? And we all know disability is this really layered, complicated thing, but I'm using this disability office software to operationalize potentially identity and self-identity by students choosing to come and formally declare that they want to receive accommodations. So I'm even funneling these numbers only by the students who were choosing to receive accommodations, right? So these numbers only represent students who are quote unquote in contact with this formal office on campus. This 40% doesn't even account for the other 28,000 students on campus or on any of our satellite locations, right? So anybody who works at a large university, right? This is, only a slice of the students who we're serving. So it depends on the audience. So the campus stakeholders, this number becomes important for how are we talking about the students that we're serving and the students that we're not. But when you go out to give a presentation to students who you're trying to encourage to utilize services because you're not capturing everybody, it is about how do we take down some of those barriers? How do we invite students into the space around that utilization to destigmatize and say you're not the only one. So it was really about how do we provide a space of education and invitation kind of all at the same time using imperfect data, right? So there's a really long answer that I couldn't do just in case my dog was barking. So I don't know if there are follow-up questions, But I'm super happy to try to answer them.
Melanie, this is Beth. Real quick, what did you include in your neurodiversity categories? I mean,
Yeah, so at the University of Utah, we use Clockwork. So I don't know if anybody else is using that. So based on the categories that exist in Clockwork, we were using autism spectrum disorder, right? Because those were two separate categories. Learning disability as its own, and then we had learning disability, math, reading, writing. And I feel like there was a learning disability other. Again, right, so if anybody's thinking about like an Excel like spreadsheet, think about a drop-down menu. That's how we're sort of going through this whole system. And I can't remember, oh, ADD and ADHD were in two separate categories. I did this back in January, so you're testing my memory just a little bit. And again, this is imperfect data, right? Because and it's all based on how an advisor sort of goes in and flags. So you're also using the human instrument by how an advisor is sort of interpreting all of this. And we flagged it as one or more. So a student could, let's say, for instance, have that diagnosis of ADD and a math learning disability and a reading learning disability, right? So it could have been one or more.
Wow,
Is that
really,
yeah, okay.
really super interesting, Melanie. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
I see that we're about to hit 5 o'clock. Emmanuel posted something about looking for tips that help students know when their professors or employers are safe people to disclose to. So what I'll do is I'll wrap this up, and I'll leave the call open. And so if people have comments that they want to put in the chat, or just, you know, speak it to Emmanuel, I'll just keep the call open. Amazing conversation as always. It's just always fascinating to hear your perspectives and insights on this important work, and to know what good hands so many students are in, because you care this deeply about these important issues. And the issue of identity and disclosure is particularly fascinating to me. So I hope that we'll be able to continue these conversations. So everybody, take care. I'll be in touch with a next call sometime in June, and we'll maybe continue this, but I encourage you to continue with one another as well. So like I said, I'll leave the call open. If anyone has anything they want to share with Emmanuel, please do. Otherwise, I will see you all soon. Take care, everyone.
Yeah, thank you everyone for having me again, and you will be hearing probably from Jess in August when we officially launch our studies, so keep an eye out.
Yay.
It looks like we are the last one left. If you don't have to stay if you don't have anything.
Yeah, no, that's all right. But you know, Emmanuel, actually, I was just having a conversation with my partner is a provost here at a small college that enrolls a large number of students with learning differences. And she just, there's an article in the Chronicle, and I'm gonna send it to you, about creating a neurodiversity friendly classroom. And she's sharing that with her faculty to kind of talk about, here are some fairly simple strategies that do make a difference, that give the student the sense that they are in a safe place. And, you know, one of the things that that I think was helpful as she and I talked through this article was just the differences between accessibility and accommodation, right? Like, and so professors get really hung up on the, you know, accommodations that they have to provide, when really they could step back and make the whole experience much more accessible. You know, but how do students know?
Exactly, and that was the thing. We did the same thing. We do a lot of training at Austin Peay, and the professors know, and they are willing to create a safe space. But we do have some students that are still a bit, they worry, even if they know that will be a safe space, but they're not sure because of the experience they had in the past.
Right.
So how do we help them go past that? Even if, like you were saying, we do a lot of the training on the faculty side, they are doing a lot of the things they need to do to create the safe space. But how do we help change that perception from the students and with
Right.
all the situation they went through? That's why I was asking to see if anyone had any like experience currently with this kind of situation. But we can discuss it next time with more people.
It's Jennifer Clausen from University of Montana, Montana. She has these stickers that she hands out to people that have been through the training. And that's one of the things that we're working on with the College Autism Network is creating a sort of template for the autism friendly campus, and being able to help people identify themselves as a safe person to disclose to. So there, I think there is some stuff going on. There is some change afoot. So we will keep you all posted on that.
Sounds good. Thank you so
Okay.
much for everything you do. And do you know the date of the next one, or we just let us know?
No,
Yeah,
I try to move them around a little bit so that people who have standing commitments can at least make some of them. So I'll send out a note, and probably 4 or 5 weeks from now. Probably this time of day seems to work for a lot of people. So
good.
so you'll hear from me.
All right. Thank you again. See you next
Thank
time.
you. Take care.
Goodbye.